When you think of The Witcher, I kinda doubt the 427 failed spin-off games cross your mind. Instead, you think of The Witcher 3, or if you want to give yourself crippling depression, maybe the Netflix show. But the truth is, CDPR have tried around 4 million times to license out The Witcher for spin-offs, and with almost no exceptions, every attempt has failed. And I stress almost because things started off really interesting in The Witcher 1 era, but then when we get to The Witcher 3 and beyond years, well, it ain't pretty, it's actually kind of a bloodbath. In fact, even saying it that way might be underselling it. And we're covering everything today, so strap yourself in, because this story begins all the way back in the ancient times, 2007, when it was decided that the moment had arrived to expand on the modest success of the first Witcher game with a new Mortal Kombat ripoff, bet you haven't seen that one before, as well as a 2D beat-em-up/platformer, and that was the one that released first. It's called The Witcher Crimson Trail, and after tracking it down, which was a nightmare because it basically doesn't exist at this point, well, I have to say that Crimson Trail is kind of amazing. At least it's amazing if you don't care about the little things, like, gameplay, because that part of Crimson Trail, well, it's pretty boring, and what we need to get to is the reason I beat this game 9 times in a row. Why did I do that to myself if the gameplay made me want to step into oncoming traffic? Well, 1, because I have a compulsive need to not cut any corners with my videos, it's why they take like 3 weeks each, because I don't want to waste your time with garbage, but 2 is because this little hour-long mobile game from 2007 not only has a story, but it also has choices, consequences, and several endings, none of which are documented anywhere online, so I had to blindly figure out what in the hell I was supposed to do to get each of them, and 1 ended up being so unbelievably depressing, even by Witcher standards, that I could hardly believe it. Now, just so we can continue and you have an idea of what this game even is, here's the 20-second rundown gameplay-wise. Crimson Trail has 12 levels, but really, there are 4. You just play through each environment 3 times in a row before you fight a boss and move on to the next. The combat is just mindless button mashing with a combo system that doesn't work, because you can press whatever buttons you want in whichever order and they'll activate anyway, and the platforming is just jumping without knowing where you'll land because you can't see that far. I mean, it's a 20-year-old Java game, whatever, who cares, and let's just get straight to where Crimson Trail gets weirdly ambitious, which is with the story. So, you play as a very young Geralt who has just set out on his own for the very first time. You quickly come across your first major opponent, a werewolf, and once it's been killed, Geralt finds one of its previous victims, a nobleman still clinging to life. The dying man hands over a crumpled map leading to a nearby castle, as well as a mysterious ring featuring 2 engraved lion heads, and with his final breath, the man says, "Save us." Now, this ring is extremely important, and it's at this point where the major choices begin in such a clever way for a game like this, especially when you consider where this is all leading. You see, after you've played through the next environment, a graveyard outside the castle from the map, you'll come across a Striga, and the choice you have to make here is one that wouldn't be at all obvious to non-Witcher fans. What you need to do for the good ending is not to fight or run away, but to simply keep the Striga occupied. Just like in Witcher 1 and the original short story, you can cure the beast by simply surviving in its lair until sunrise, at which point the Striga will transform into a young woman. Geralt will notice that this Striga woman bears a close resemblance to the dead nobleman, and then she takes off towards the castle before Geralt can stop her. Now, once you begin the next level, there's something new you might notice, and that is that one of the heads on the nobleman's ring will now be lit up red, which doesn't happen unless you properly cure the Striga. Lighting up the second head can be done at the very end of the castle area, which is filled with knights that can't die. If you strike one down, it'll just get back up immediately. And what you need to do before moving on is to find one specific, ever so slightly different looking knight. Once you've found the correct one and have dealt enough damage to him, he'll seem to come out of some sort of trance and will tell Geralt that a woman in the nearby swamp placed a curse on his family, which includes the nobleman and the girl you cured from her, Striga-ness. And by the way, that girl doesn't ever show up again. You then have to decide whether to spare this guy or to kill him, and the correct choice for the good ending is to let him live, at which point the second head on your lion ring will ignite, and you'll be ready for the final boss in the next area. This boss is the reason the game is called Crimson Trail, as it's a vampire, a Bruxa, who's been enslaving everything and everyone in the area. Once this Bruxa has been taken down, you'll face your final decision, that being whether Geralt finishes her off or not. But this choice doesn't really matter all that much unless you've managed to fully ignite the nobleman's ring. If you hadn't, or only managed to light up one of the heads, then you're locked into a horrible ending no matter what. If you spare the Bruxa, Geralt dies, and not in an ambiguous way. She knocks him unconscious, and his body is pulled into the swamp and devoured. And believe it or not, that's the more upbeat ending of the two. If you kill the Bruxa without your ring prepared, then she uses her last bit of energy to transfer her essence into Geralt, and the game ends by telling you that weeks after the events of Crimson Trail, tales began circulating about a mad, white-haired witcher who'd been slaughtering innocents all across the continent, and those stories led to a detachment from Kaer Morhen, including Vesemir and Eskel being dispatched to take Geralt down. I think even CDPR's most depressing ending doesn't touch that one. Fortunately though, the ring can change everything. If you made the right choices along the way, there is one good ending. Sparing the Bruxa still ends poorly. She doesn't kill Geralt because the power of the ring saves him, but she continues to terrorize and enslave the locals, so this is the you completely wasted your time and accomplished nothing ending. If you kill her in this situation though, she'll try but fail to take over Geralt's body before dying, and her reign of terror will come to an official end, as will the game. You know, I've got to say, props to the devs of Crimson Trail Breakpoint. They were working on a license from CDPR, and even though they went out of business just months after this game came out, which actually is something that happens with another game too later, I still think this game is pretty okay for what it is. It's not really worth playing in the 2020s, but it is interesting, and more importantly, it's way more successful at what it's trying to be than most of what's coming up, which includes another spin-off from the very next year, 2008. This one is called The Witcher Dual Mail, or The Witcher Versus. It changed names after release, I assume because Dual Mail is the clunkiest name for a game I've ever heard. Anyway, you know how a little earlier I said that this second Witcher 1 era spin-off was a Mortal Kombat clone? Well, I lied, because even if The Witcher Versus kinda looks like a standard fighting game, it isn't at all. The Witcher Versus is actually an RPG, or scratch that, it's an RPS, meaning rock, paper, scissors, because despite what you're seeing, that's more or less what this game was. How the gameplay worked is you'd queue up a series of attacks, and then you'd send those attacks like an email to another player as a challenge, at which point they'd have as long as they needed to look at your sequence and respond to each move, which would then be animated. So you could send a challenge, log off for 6 months, and then continue the same fight as long as your opponent had replied during those 6 months, with the goal obviously being to be the last one with health. Now, The Witcher Versus had an absolutely stacked character lineup, which included Geralt and Triss and the Frightener that attacked Kaer Morhen, and, well, actually that was it. There was no Vesemir or Zoltan or Lambert or Ada or Eskel, but you could play as the Frightener for some reason, so that was something, I guess, and the game even had microtransactions way back in 2008, as you could spend real money to buy Mandrake, which in turn would get you potions and other items to boost your survivability. The game was initially PC only before being brought to mobile for a very short time, at which point the plug was pulled for both platforms. And hey, speaking of mobile games that didn't last long, let's move on to one some of you may have actually heard of. The Witcher Battle Arena, released in 2015, and yes, we did just jump forward 7 years, because other than a physical board game that was given a digital release, there wasn't anything else between 2008 and 2015, at which point they started really pumping them out. Before we get to the details of the depression-inducing Battle Arena though, I do want to quickly thank Displate for sponsoring this video. You probably already know that Displate make high-quality metal posters, and script they sent me aside, the best possible pitch I can make is that for years, long before this sponsorship, I've had a bunch of them displayed out in my living room. They took 10 seconds to install, they've stayed put for many months, and if I ever move, they'll come down in another 10 seconds with no damage done, thanks to the magnets you use to put them up. It really doesn't get more convenient, and whatever your tastes are, Displate have just about anything you can think of. From Witcher to Cyberpunk to Kingdom Come to whatever your favorite band, show, or game is, they probably have it. They're all officially licensed, and if you're interested, now is the time. And here come the talking points, as through my channel you can get 22% off 1 to 2 Displates, and 33% off 3 or more. And as this is a Christmas discount, that deal will last until the 24th of December. Just use code NEONNIGHT at checkout or use the link in my description and have that discount automatically applied. Now, that said, to get back to Battle Arena, I do realize that many of you will be extremely, just incredibly jealous to hear that I was among the lucky few to have played Battle Arena back in its prime. In fact, it was my first ever Witcher game, not trying to brag. And anyway, looking back now, what the hell were they thinking with this one? I mean, Battle Arena released alongside Witcher 3 to try and siphon players from one game to the other. If I remember right, physical copies of Witcher 3 came with an insert that had a code for a Geralt skin in Battle Arena to incentivize you to try it out. Not a bad idea, right? Well, yeah, but for some reason that is beyond my comprehension, there was almost no content in Battle Arena for anyone who got on board the franchise with Witcher 3, which was 95% of the player base. The gameplay of Battle Arena wasn't anything amazing, but it also wasn't the problem. The main game mode was Conquest or Capture the Flag, whatever you want to call it, where with a small team of Witcher characters, you'd go to an objective, gain control of it, and earn points for doing so. Whichever team had more points when the time was up won the match. Not exactly groundbreaking stuff, but it was fine. Where it becomes extremely unsurprising that this game was shut down in mere months despite Witcher 3 becoming the most popular game of the year is when you look at the playable roster of Battle Arena. At launch, there was no Yennefer, no Triss, no Dandelion, Ciri, Vesemir, Eredin, Eskel, or Lambert, but instead the single-digit number of playable characters was made up of fan favorites like a random rock golem you could play as for some reason, and Ithne, a dryad from the books that isn't in any of the games, and also the Operator, a very optional boss from a Witcher 2 side quest, one that you could easily miss. The only characters for someone who might have been interested in Battle Arena because of Witcher 3, which is the entire point of a game like this, were Geralt, of course. Okay, this is future me chiming in with an important Witcher Battle Arena update. Bet that's the first time anyone's ever said that sentence. But the denial has finally worn off, because while editing this video and looking through every trailer, of which there are a ton, I realized that Geralt wasn't there either. I mean, there's a whole official roster announcement, and Geralt himself, the Witcher, is nowhere to be found even though he was in the game at launch. They just left him out of the trailers for some reason. Like, I get that Battle Arena came out alongside Witcher 3, right before actually, so you'd want some Witcher 2 content to ease people in, but how does that equal marketing the game as having no Geralt, no Triss, and no Roach, aka the three most important Witcher 2 characters? Anyway, as we'll soon establish, this sort of thing gets even worse with our next game, so back to whatever I was saying. I mean, they did eventually add a very small number of DLC characters, but even some of those are confusing. Like, they added the Succubus from Witcher 2, that one specifically, and Vabjorn, a random warrior from Skellige. And while they did eventually at least add Ciri and Yennefer, I feel like Battle Arena is a game that deserved its failure, and you know they really missed the mark when every single trailer makes this game look like it was meant to come out alongside the second game, not the third. And the most shocking part is that Battle Arena isn't even the worst marketed game we're covering today. No, sadly that title goes to Thronebreaker, an absolute masterpiece that I am very sad to say was failed by everyone who was involved in trying to make it look appealing to the public. In case you didn't know, Thronebreaker is a single-player narrative-driven game that came out in 2018 on the very same day as the multiplayer version of Gwent. Thronebreaker: The Witcher Tales, which is its full name, was intended to be the first of an ongoing anthology Witcher Tale series, with each one telling a standalone story in the Witcher universe. Thronebreaker specifically is about the ruler of Lyria and Rivia, Queen Meve, and the second game was going to be about Yorvith. That didn't happen though, nor did any other Witcher Tale games, because at release, Thronebreaker flopped so unbelievably hard that all plans for future Witcher Tales were scrapped. CDPR have stated publicly, and that's how you know it's bad, that the game fell far short of expectations. The number I've heard, and this part hasn't been said outright, so take it for what it is, but the number that's out there is that Thronebreaker sold just 10% of what was projected. And whatever the number was, the low sales were not because the game sucked. No, Thronebreaker bombed mostly because the marketing was so unbelievably bad that I still can't wrap my head around it 5 years later, and I have an oversized head. The trailers for Thronebreaker feel like acts of sabotage by some mole planted deep within CDPR's ranks, because they undersell everything that's amazing about the game while putting emphasis on its one weak point. And what's worse, and this part is beyond bizarre because it's the entire point of a trailer, but you can watch all of them, and unless you already know, you will very likely come away from the trailers having no idea what Thronebreaker is even supposed to be, and how in the hell do you sell people on a game when they don't know what it is? The answer is that you don't. This game sold 3 copies worldwide, and that's such a shame because if you're a Witcher fan who hasn't played Thronebreaker, well, you owe it to yourself to check this game out, if you can overlook its one flaw. I don't know why I just started talking in one-word sentences, but anyways, that flaw has nothing to do with the storytelling, because Thronebreaker belongs in CDPR's holy trinity of incredible writing. Of all the amazing work they've done and the great stories they've told, the best, in my opinion, have been the Bloody Baron questline, Hearts of Stone, and Thronebreaker. And by the way, Thronebreaker doesn't come last in that trio. I would very much recommend not watching the trailers if you're going to give Thronebreaker a first-time try, because you should really know as little about the story going in as possible. All you should be aware of is that you play as Queen Meve, and when things go wrong in her kingdom, well, you need to clean up the mess while killing a shit ton of Nilfgaardians in the process. The writing is flawless, and I mean flawless, but the gameplay is where things are more of a mixed bag. The exploration part of it, well, there's basically nothing to complain about there. You run through beautiful linear areas while listening to the greatest soundtrack ever conceived by mankind, and every 60 seconds or so you'll come across a story event, most of which have choices, and if you love Witcher 3 for its choices and consequences, well, Thronebreaker arguably handles that sort of thing even better than Witcher 3, which I realize that is really hard to believe, but it's kinda true. I mean, everything you do in Thronebreaker matters. There are a ton of endings, and the moral dilemmas you're placed in the middle of aren't written like they were meant to be analyzed by someone with severe head trauma. And thank you CDPR for that, because for some reason that's how most games handle choices, with no subtlety and very predictable outcomes. Thronebreaker, well, it isn't like that, and we'll just leave it there. Now, where the gameplay truly becomes a mixed bag, because if you hadn't noticed, I said it was one, but then listed 0 negatives, well, it's the battles. The combat is what brings it all down, because combat in Thronebreaker is represented by a weird version of Gwent that isn't like Witcher 3's or the standalone game. And the single most important thing to know about Thronebreaker's Gwent is that all of it can be skipped if you don't like it. It's a completely optional part of the experience that you can avoid with no drawbacks, and if you just want to take in the story and exploration, you can and should. Do not let the Gwent part rob you of an amazing story, and I feel very, very strongly that Thronebreaker never should have had anything to do with Gwent, and that's not because Gwent is terrible in this game, it's okay, just mind-numbingly easy even on the highest difficulty, but I feel that way because every single person on the planet should have been able to predict that Thronebreaker would only sell 2 copies worldwide if it was marketed as a weird, confused, single-player Gwent spin-off hybrid mess, which is what was done, yet that description is an insult to what Thronebreaker really is. The failure of the Witcher Tales idea is so frustrating because it was so avoidable. The anthology concept was and is perfect, and there would have been a very dedicated audience if it had been thought out just a little better, and also maybe they should have started with a more marketable character before dipping into the obscure. Point is though, I want to live in a world where we've been getting a Witcher tale every couple of years for the past half-decade, but sadly, that's not the reality. Anyway, hey, if you are going to be among the first to give Thronebreaker a try, because as we've established it sadly only sold 1 copy, then consider buying it or any other games on GOG, and using my link, which is in the description, helps out the channel a lot. Now, you might be wondering if I'm also going to talk about the somewhat slow, mostly ignored death of standalone Gwent, which, as of recently, has received the pillow-over-the-nose treatment. CDPR announced at the beginning of 2023 that the plug was being pulled after a few small, final updates, which have now all come and gone. And while the servers will remain online, for now at least, it's pretty wild to see just how far the game has cratered. The sad, or maybe not sad depending on how you look at it, truth is that Gwent gets a lot of negative reactions from people coming off of Witcher 3, which is fair, it's very different from Witcher 3's Gwent, but in my opinion at least, standalone Gwent was always a good game, and at times, it was a truly great game that really did a lot of things right, and put the community first to a pretty wild extent. The Gwent team really did seem to care, and I would argue that in terms of artwork and music, well, games don't get better than Gwent, and I'm far from a monocle-wearing, wine-sipping art connoisseur. It's just that Gwent's artwork was consistently that good. I mean, you could show it to an uncontacted tribe off the coast of India, and the first thing they do is ask how they could commission the artist in question. Within a week, they'd have an ArtStation account. Beautiful artwork can't save a game though, sadly, and despite the positives, I have always felt that Gwent as a standalone experience was doomed from the very beginning. Why? Well, for reasons we already kinda touched on. 99.7% of people who try standalone Gwent are Witcher 3 refugees. Fans like me or you who played Witcher 3, loved it, and wanted more. Where does that lead you? Well, if you liked Witcher 3's Gwent, then at one point or another it likely led you to standalone Gwent. and part of the reason the game's player base was constantly getting smaller, even years before it really started falling off, is that with each passing update, Gwent became less beginner-friendly and more unrecognizable to new players who were coming off of Witcher 3 Gwent and thinking of giving this version a shot. As someone who has way too many hours in standalone Gwent, I am not an outsider talking about the game here. Well, there's a lot I could say about smaller mistakes made along the way that frustrated the Gwent community, or led to some seasons here and there with really annoying metas, but I don't think any of that is even necessary because those small missteps just aren't what doomed the game. The Gwent devs always had a pretty impossible situation to deal with, where Gwent as a standalone experience could not continue without some monetization and an active player base. But most incoming new players were expecting something that could never ever maintain an active player base. Listen, I loved Witcher 3 Gwent my first time around, but there's nothing to it. It completely falls apart when you add a PvP element to the mix, and at most it could have been a $5 offline mobile app that you might open once a month when you're bored out of your mind. It was built for mindless fun against stupid AI, and nothing about it lended itself to a truly competitive experience. And while the original standalone Gwent beta was cool, almost all of its gameplay issues were a direct result of it trying to sort of cling to the Witcher 3 Gwent formula. And as much as people like to look back at the beta fondly, it had a lot of problems that just would have become worse and worse as players increased in skill. So, what we eventually ended up getting from standalone Gwent was a more traditional, much more complex card game, which I have seen firsthand a million times from my comments, just is not what most Witcher fans wanted out of Gwent. To me, it's just a situation where the failure of this game really isn't anyone's fault. The blame definitely doesn't fall on the fans because their expectations are what they are for a reason, and it really isn't the fault of the devs either, even though I do think Gwent could have done a much better job at easing new players in and also welcoming them back after a break, because one thing I did find was that Gwent was consistently brutal to return to after anything more than like a month away from the game. Anyway, it wasn't just standalone Gwent that CDPR told to look at the flowers within the past year. No, shortly before Gwent was put to death, a second Gwent-related single-player game was released. And it's not a Witcher tale, but something completely different. I'm talking about the Witcher Rogue Mage, or Gwent Rogue Mage, which was unceremoniously dumped onto the market with zero advertising in the summer of last year. It was a really weird situation because Rogue Mage was very quietly announced the day before it released. The day before, and the official Witcher accounts didn't even post about it at all, only the Gwent-specific ones. It felt like CDPR just didn't want people to know this game even existed. Maybe because Rogue Mage doesn't feel like a finished game, or even a finished expansion, because in some but not all places it's subtitled as an expansion, even though it is a completely separate game. Now, what Rogue Mage really feels like is the skeletal, picked-over remains of a once good idea. Like, there was a solid pitch that was given a green light, development started, but then they were told pretty early on to just wrap up what they already had and put it out, because someone realized very few people were going to buy this, which they didn't. Hell, when I was recording the gameplay for this video, Rogue Mage had just one player online, which was me, so anyway, in Rogue Mage, you can experience 99% of what the game has to offer in about 40 minutes. You build a deck, play a few Gwent matches in a row before a boss match that ends your session, and then you repeat that same exact thing over and over again. That is all there is to Rogue Mage, other than very occasional story cutscenes, except calling them cutscenes is an exaggeration, because the cutscenes in Rogue Mage, and god, I'm getting sick of using the word cutscenes, amount to you staring at a rough black and white sketch for 3 minutes straight. And I can't imagine that was intended to be the final product. The bones of the story that do exist are kind of interesting. They detail how the mage Alzur created the first Witcher, but across the hours you have to grind to unlock those rough sketches, there's only 10 minutes of story content in total. That's how bare bones it is. And bare bones is honestly the perfect word to describe Rogue Mage as a whole. And the only saving grace the game has is that if you want to buy it, it only costs $10 to $20 depending on which version you pick up. So at that price, it's not really worth being too hard on it, and I do think it's possible to get $10 of value out of Rogue Mage if you already love regular Gwent. Now, you may have noticed that in covering Rogue Mage, I skipped over a Witcher game from 2021, a game that many consider a classic, and by many I mean, well, no one. The game in question was skipped over for two reasons. So I could have all the Gwent-related stuff cleanly together, and also because I figured we may as well end on a game that truly didn't get anything right after it launched. And I'm of course talking about The Witcher Monster Slayer, a Pokemon Go clone that had some redeeming qualities at first, but then almost immediately started to gut everything it had going for it. If you didn't know, Monster Slayer only lasted a little over a year before being pulled from all app stores, and that was due to the minor issue of, nobody playing it, and as someone who tried this game out at release and stuck around for a bit, well, it's not too hard to understand why that happened. The core of the game was mostly what you'd expect. You're a wolf school witcher, so go kill some monsters out in the world, even though you don't have a silver sword because the game stuck those behind a paywall. And no, I'm not kidding. Steel sword only for you unless you are ready to grind or cough up, with basic silver swords starting at $5 and going all the way up to 50 plus, because this game was the anti-Gwent, with pretty obnoxious microtransactions that only increased in their obnoxiousness as time went on, to the point where about a year after release, the decision was made to ruin everything about the game to try and get you to open your wallet. When Monster Slayer first came out, the combat was somewhat skill-based. Spending money helped, but there was a perfect parry system to completely avoid damage, critical hits were something you earned, the game had a full-blown RPG-style skill tree you had to be strategic with, and potions and oils were something you needed to use wisely, only dipping into your supply when a tough fight called for them. Then, with just one update in 2022, nearly everything skill-based was wiped out. Alchemy had to be used even for basic fights, perfect parries didn't block damage anymore, the skill tree was completely removed, and, well, by this point you probably see what they were trying to accomplish with those changes. Too many people were playing and progressing without entering their credit card info, so Spocko, the now defunct developer of Monster Slayer, just removed everything that made the game a game, and turned combat into something you just watched while mindlessly scribbling, with the outcome of anything other than very basic fights almost entirely being based on how much money you'd spent. It was kinda shameless even by mobile gaming standards where the bar isn't exactly high, and unsurprisingly, just months later, The Witcher Monster Slayer died what I think was a pretty well-deserved death, rounding out what can only be described as a disastrous Witcher 3 and Beyond era of spin-offs. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, as that's how YouTube decides what is worthy content, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing. I'm gonna date the video here, but in the next month I'll have an Elden Ring video coming up, Plague Tale as well, and finally, you guys will soon get the follow-up to the big Every Choice Geralt Would Make video, this time covering Hearts of Stone. Thank you to my patrons, as always, for their support. Consider checking it out, as we have a Discord and early videos and other bonuses. Plus, do not forget to play Thronebreaker, and by the way, saving this for the very end, but if you don't have Thronebreaker and want it, go follow me on Twitter and tweet at me, and I'll try to get a few of you guys codes. Anyway, that's all for now. See ya.